Okay, so I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking through the exam for you so you've got a clear idea of what's going to be expected. So you know that to begin with, we're going to have, there will be 10 multiple choice questions, and these will be part of an unseen part of the exam. And that's going to take place hopefully on the 18th of April, but I'm still waiting to hear that everybody is okay with that date. It'll be in the morning, and we'll work around time so we're starting at a reasonable time so everyone can get there comfortably. That part of the exam will be, the short part will be the unseen paper, which, like I say, is 10 multiple choice questions. And those questions, we will make sure that we've covered them in each session. And I'll make sure that I give you some revision so that you're clear on the kind of questions that are asked, the way that they'll be asked. And they really are straightforward questions that shouldn't cause you too much anxiety about that. Okay, so then the second part of the paper will be a scene exam. So that will be on the same day, on the 18th. You'll have done your multiple choice questions, the 10, and then you'll move forward to a scene paper, and you'll get to see that paper. It'll be a couple of weeks before the exam takes place, so we've just got to agree what date that will come out to you, and I'll have that soon. And the scene paper, I will tell you now that it's about you to select one piece of legislation that we've talked about in the module, and I'll probably give you some hints to the better ones that might be a choice, the better choice perhaps, or the easier one, but it'll partly depend on what interests you. And what I want you to do is to explain how your knowledge of one piece of legislation would support you working alongside an individual from a social pedagogical perspective. So when I talk about the different pieces of legislation, we're going to be talking in particular about things like Haltung. It might be around head, heart and hands. It might be around the Diamond model in terms of well-being and things like the Care Act. So it's about choosing something that you're comfortable talking about in terms of social pedagogy and thinking about how that relates to the piece of legislation. So you could use some examples that you could have prepared before the exam. You could think about practical examples. And again, what I'm trying to assess here is your understanding of how social pedagogy would connect with that piece of legislation, perhaps from the perspective of the policy and legislation makers, but also and so thinking there about political persuasion, for example, but also about how you personally could connect some of the principles, some of the statutory duties and powers within the legislation to embracing a social pedagogical approach. So it really is an individual part of the exam which you can answer in whichever way you want to, but most importantly it's about making a connection between legislation and social pedagogy. And then finally there will be an essay, and the date for this is later than the exam, so there are two parts. So this will be separate, and obviously you can see the essay question, which is going to ask you to be looking in particular at advocacy and legislation. So we're going to ask you, I'm going to ask you to read a case study, and you then need to write a letter to the young person, offering them some support, offering them some, and obviously some of your knowledge around legislation will be helpful there, but also about the way that you approach that letter and how you support that individual. And then secondly, you're going to assume that you're working for a local authority advocacy organisation, and you've been asked to provide some information to a local medical centre explaining the different types of advocacy that exist in adults, and I'm going to be doing a session on that. So basically there are the different types of advocacy that we'll be talking about: our Care Act advocacy, which I'll explain to you, an IMHA, an independent mental health advocate, which is part of the mental health legislation, and that's for people who are detained in hospital. And then there's the independent mental capacity advocate, an IMCA, and that's for people who don't have capacity to look at that role. And so that for that part of the assessment, you could look at producing that information in any format that you wanted. So it might be a poster. You can really think about how you would do that. But the idea is that that could be something that's shared at a medical centre for people who are just passing and wondering what all these different advocacy roles involve. So we will have more time to discuss this, and you can send me any questions about it. And like I say, I will be putting up more information, so I feel that you're not going to walk into that exam and there's going to be any surprises, but it will mean that you've got to do some preparation for it.